So we started this morning talking about the questions that companies should be asking when it comes to AI. And we just had a discussion about what are the things that companies need to be thinking about when they're just getting started on the AI journey. I want to turn to a particular question now that is probably top of mind for any company getting started on the AI maturity curve or even moving along the AI maturity curve that I think is simple at first glance, but probably sneakily complex. And that is, if you're a company going into AI, should you be building your own solutions? Should you be buying your solutions? Should it be some mix? So the age-old build versus buy debate. I have some esteemed colleagues here to give us input on this. So three practitioners who have led this for their organizations. And Tia, your job is to advise companies on this. So I actually want to start with you. What counsel would you give? Should companies be building? Should they be buying? How should they think about it?
So I used to be a practitioner as well and had to make that decision. And now I sit on the other side of the fence, so to speak, where I'm advising people. And I repeat multiple times, this is Tia's opinion only. This is not a representation of Amazon Web Services. I say that intentionally, right? Because, you know, this is from past experience and then in my day job now. It's $1 million question, to build or to buy, that's the question. And I think it depends. There's lots of variables that go into the decision-making process. And oftentimes I draw a 4-box quadrant for, so you think about Gartner Magic Quadrant, I draw a 4-box quadrant for executives. Along the y-axis, I have resource availability. Along the x-axis, I have criticality to the business. Now, yes, you can get into, is it a commodity? Is it fundamental? How is it going to change your business? But fundamentally, I think these are the two questions you start with. And I think it's not an or, I think it's an and. So let me give you an example. If you are a media and entertainment company, we're going to just use that for an example. And we know the way that media and entertainment companies post the pandemic are measured for success has drastically changed. It's a lot around ad spend, engagement, and other things. Personalization, some would argue, is, while it's table stakes for everyone, it's mission critical for an M&E company. So let's stick with that example. Let's think about pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, if I'm Tia's M&E company, and my competitors have some sort of personalization solution and I'm launching a new platform, and we know TV, VOD, video on demand is a booming business now. Everybody's sitting home. Then resources may be readily available, but the time to market or time to value to build a personalization solution may take too long. While it's mission critical, so the criticality to my business is high, and I have some resources, time is a constraint for me. In that case, I would consult someone to buy now. What I mean by buy is not buy some SaaS-based solution that has a 3, 4, 5-year term contract, but it may be to buy a managed service from AWS as pay-as-you-go. And while I am building my critically or fundamental solution for personalization that's tailor-fit to my company, that's going to, you know, blow my competitors out of the water, I have a solution in place while I'm working on building what's state-of-the-art or augmenting what I'm leveraging from AWS. Now, let's say personalization is just, it's not table stakes to my company. Then why wouldn't I go buy? Why wouldn't I use those very scarce resources for something that is mission critical for my company? Because let's face it, AI, machine learning resources they're scarce. And it's hard to retain them, and it's hard to keep them engaged, and it's just statistically known. So in that case, I go buy something. It's not fundamental to my business. It's not the secret sauce to my business. If I look at my return on investment, likely it's more economically friendly for me to go buy something, and I get rapid speed to market, and it's not a game changer. Now, if it's a game changer, I have the resources and I have the time, I would always coach someone, counsel someone to build it. Make that investment. You don't have any constraints. You want to have something that's IP core to your business, that no one can replicate maybe the way you've designed it or the way your models are engineered, the data is trained on, whatever it may be. You build it. And so I think that it's based off two fundamental things and what's constraining your business: the criticality, the resources, and then sometimes it's while you gain leverage in the market, or sometimes it's just you go buy it because that's what makes sense and it's economically friendly to your business model.
That's good. I love the 2x2 way of thinking about it. Joanne, Ryan, actually I'll start with you, Joanne. So this is at least your second stop as a CEO, so I know you have lived this. How do you think about it?
So I think, if I'm thinking about companies that ultimately we work with, and it's related to some of the questions that she brought forward, which is, are we uniquely capable of solving this problem or challenge? And is that problem or challenge, so one way I look at it is it big enough or small enough? So is it big enough because it's absolutely, in your matrix, right? Mission critical, and it's the difference between our competitive success or not, and we have some unique IP or relationship to it that we should build. But it's also, is it small enough, right? So in other words, it doesn't always have to be the biggest bets. It can also be smaller bets that allow you to learn and to experiment and to develop maybe smaller versions of that IP and kind of flex your muscle as it relates to this particular kind of technology. And so that's also an opportunity, I think, for kind of that internal build or ownership, because it can also prepare you for or understand things that could come into play when you're talking about sort of the bigger, the bigger bets. So it's that question of, should you solve that challenge or problem, and then ultimately looking at that sort of that question of big or small.
Okay, good perspective.
Yeah, this is a super, super challenging question right now. I think Tia's fundamental point of, right, why not buy it for now until you have a very, very clear reason you need to build it? I think that stands. But honestly, my advice or thinking around this right now is that it's too early to say. The landscape is changing too rapidly. Again, 6 months ago, the concept of training a large language model that would be performant, both from a cost performance and accuracy performance, that was something that seemed unattainable except to the largest companies that had massive amounts of money to invest. And by the week, like every week, that is now changing. We are now down to, instead of 70 billion parameter models, we are state-of-the-art accuracy performance on 1.3 billion parameter models. And of course, if you're shrinking the model size, you also shrink the general cost of hosting that model and serving inferences. So we're just seeing the barrier to entry for building your own just fall off a cliff. And what I thought would have been a foolish business decision when it comes to building 6 months ago seems highly feasible now. Give it 6 more months. How does that change even more? We're already at the point where people are training these models on M1 MacBook Pros and spending $100, $300 to do it when they're not using their local device. So it's really changing extremely rapidly right now. And so I think that decision, you can make it now if you have to, but I think there's a good chance you'll end up changing your mind in another 6 months.
And let me just put a disclaimer on my response. Mine is not about solely large language models, right? Mine, and that's why I use the example of recommendation engine or a personalization system. Mine is more a solution, right? Because it's more than just the LLM or the model that's an input into what you're building, because no one ever just builds a model to extrapolate value. So my point was more on AI-based solutions and products. When do you think about building versus buying?
Okay.
I just want to add one thing to this, because I think when you're asking the question, kind of to your point, if the challenge that you have, so I can use my company as an example where we solve for a very particular problem, which is what language actually appeals to what people, right? We are in a unique position because of the data that we have and because of the models that we created to actually solve for that particular problem, which you can imagine has all these other implications of all the different places you could use it. So each company may have their own answer to that question. And so if that is a solution that you need, trying to create that solution for yourself may or may not make sense depending on the data that you have. That's an example of part of your suite to buy a solution that ultimately can help that. So it really has to do with, I think it goes back to the data. What data do you uniquely have? Or because of the problem you are trying to solve, you have that unique data set so you uniquely can solve it, and no one else is actually going to solve that problem. You are going to solve that problem.
Well
and
said.
and then looking for, whether I'm buying or building, I have a suite of problems, which are the ones I'm uniquely capable of solving because of the data that I have or that I've decided I need to have, et cetera, versus, hey, who else is solving this suite of problems that I need to have solved? And they have the data that uniquely allows them to solve that problem.
Daniel, I want to turn to you. So Ryan mentioned, barriers to entry, largest companies. You're uniquely positioned in that you have led one of those large companies. How would you advise other executives thinking about this?
Well, I guess I need to call Tia and she can walk me through it. No, so it is a decision tree. I think the way she outlined it is right. It's a decision tree. And there's a few things that you have to ask. One is, do you want to be a fast mover?
Okay.
The other one is it a strategic asset to your company? Is the community actually contributing more than you can actually contribute? Is it something that, are you doing it for technology's sake, or are you doing it for the company growth? All these things are decisions that I think help you make, they're questions that help you make this decision. So if you kind of go through that, if you want to be a fast mover, you don't build it. You said that. You know what? Let someone go bring in that capability, buy it, and actually see if it actually produces what you want. What's the outcome, which we talked about before? Is it a strategic asset? It doesn't just, if it's not a strategic asset, it may be a commodity. It doesn't mean it's not critical to your business. Look, I think a network is a commodity. You don't have a network, your business doesn't run. So it's super critical, but the question is that going to separate you from your competition? That kind of helps you make that decision. Do you have the resources, the means to go do it? Is it a priority? And a lot of, as you go through that decision tree, I think it helps make that decision pretty clear. My view right now with this is you buy it. One is the community can out-invest you, for sure. It's early. You mentioned it. It's still very immature. Who knows what it's going to look like? Why make that investment? And companies right now, they're looking at a payback that is much sooner.
Yeah.
And because of that ROI, it will be very difficult to justify the ongoing cost, which you talk about a lot, which I couldn't agree more. And so you're not making that buy versus build decision just for the capability. Are you willing to, it's a long-term decision. And for a company like McDonald's, we're not we are a technology company because technology is driving the growth of McDonald's, but that's not our core business. We sell hamburgers. And so those decisions are a little easier for us, that this is something that we would buy because we want to be fast movers, we want to learn very quickly, and we believe that we can contribute to the community with our knowledge. We don't necessarily need to contribute through our engineers.
Well said. I want to come back to you, Tia. So let's talk about a slightly different question, but I think it's the logical follow-up that any executive has to think about. If you go down the path of buying, how do you make sure that you stay differentiated? How do you separate yourself from any other company that's using the same services, the same models?
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because it goes back to, I think, the point Daniel was making, that something could be a commodity and how critical is it to your business. I think a lot of times, and let me take a step back, I came from the financial services space. So people like to say we printed money. I don't know if that's a true statement or not, but yet because we were heavily regulated, oftentimes the companies I worked for preferred, in most cases outside of like the general ledger and those sort of things, to build our own solutions. Partially, especially when you get into the customer experience, customer service space, to create a durable product or experience that created stickiness in the market that would set you apart. And so if you choose to buy something, you have to think about your full implementation and how you design the experience. So say you go buy something from, I don't know, I'll just use a random company, Salesforce, and you buy their Customer 360 platform. Now you think about not only how you implement it, how your customers will consume and interact with it, but then 9 times out of 10, you're going to augment that. And the dimensions or ways from a product standpoint you choose to augment that to create durability or stickiness or an unparalleled experience for your customer is going to be based off working backwards from the persona of your customer, the customer journey mapping, what will uniquely be profound for your customer. I don't know, let's take a basic example again with customer service. Say it gives you a full view of the customer profile, and so you can anticipate maybe what the customer needs or wants or desires. But how do you build upon that next best action or next best offer intent? And that's where you may take proprietary models that your team builds and integrate them or augment or embed them into the overall solution to create a different experience than, say, your top competitor.
Right.
So it's all about understanding, again, who you're creating something for, what the value they want to derive, what makes them unique, and then augmenting, even if you decide to buy something, and or influencing that vendor to think about a fast-moving feature that you can take advantage of first. So there's multiple ways you can do it, but it's also about truly creating that durability for your specific customer profile.
There's 2 things you mentioned there. One is the experience, this idea of full experience. You alluded to a second one there at the end, which is also the idea of speed to market, potentially as a differentiator.
Yeah.
Ryan, I'm gonna flip it over to you. I know you think about this a lot. What would you add?
So help me understand the question.
If you go down the path of buying at least part of your AI solutions, how do you differentiate your company?
Yeah, I was thinking about that question the whole time. It's actually, this is more of your wheelhouse. I'm happy to answer it, but do you want to talk about what you do?
Well, I think I was thinking about something that Tia just said, which is, I think companies are in a really unique moment right now, working with people who are, so in Pluralytics case, but many others, where we're kind of trying to solve a specific problem, using our own models that can interact with the large language models. You can actually push and work with those communities to explore and think about features together that they uniquely are on top of and are, drinking from the fire hose every day about how the language models are changing in terms of language output, right? That's an example of where we are because of drifting, because of hallucinating, because of all of those things. Like, that's literally what we grapple with every day. You may have, as company X, a really unique challenge, or even not on that, but an insight, right, based on what you need that can help influence the product of the company that you're working with to ultimately help solve that problem for you. And you don't have to have that on your ledger, right, to potentially solve. And I think because the market is moving so quickly right now, this notion between buy and build is kind of an interesting one, because I think for certain companies, it's actually, there's a Venn diagram where I can buy, but I can also get some aspect of build because I'm working so closely with the company or companies to figure out what that what that solution is than something that, is more mature.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I think the thing, as far as customizing it, making it uniquely your own, we shouldn't forget that just out of the box, these generative services being offered by some of the large companies, they're extremely flexible. You can tell your model, I want you to respond to, or it's not your model, but you can tell the service, I want all responses to be sound like they're from Shakespeare. I want all these responses to rhyme. So you can heavily customize the way this model will interact with your customers, whatever feature you're deploying it in. So there's that already out of the box. But then, as we were talking about earlier, the open source community is just exploding with ways to efficiently fine-tune these models using everything from supervised fine-tuning, RLHF, LoRa's. All these approaches are emerging where it's very easy to make this model your own.
Right.
And have it have the voice, the theme, the approach, the style, the tone that differentiates you and your company. And Daniel brought up in an earlier conversation about branding. I think that was extremely important. Some of those techniques I just mentioned, and again, some of the prompting you can do out of the box can make this model appear to be really on brand for your company.
I think if you think about what you just said, how do you actually get an advantage over your competitor? The way I think about it is simple, which is the technology itself is not going to give you, the competitive advantage. It's how it's applied. And to me, what I do think is the secret sauce for a lot of our companies is what's the ecosystem that you've actually created? And have you created a flexible ecosystem where you can bring in this capability and it be part of an overall outcome? And because if you think that AI is going to give you an advantage, I would argue that's not the case. I would argue the ecosystem is going to give you the advantage, and that's just part of it, and how you apply it to the journey mappings that you talk about.
Right.
I think that's what's going to help you separate from the competition. If you're just implementing the technology for technology's sake, you'll have a cool solution, but probably doesn't do much.
Tia?
Yeah, the only thing I was just going to add to what Ryan was sharing was more just for this audience. Most of these models can be fine-tuned with your data, and it takes a very small amount of data. So when we talk about, if we're going to specifically, which it feels like this is where a lot of the conversation is going on generative AI and specific large language models, if you're doing something with the chat experience or to generate a personalized email or some sort of content curation generation, then oftentimes, yeah, you can leverage the LLMs or large language models. Then there's also ways to fine tune it, I think, just to be very specific to this audience that we're speaking to, or, that we're creating this for. And that allows you to tailor fit it based on your data. So it feels, breathes, looks like your company. And that is what also makes a difference. And it will take a little bit more time, but again, it still helps you achieve the time to value, speed to market goal as well.
Right.
And I do like the idea that, because you brought it up, this co-innovate.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean that you're not helping advance the technology. And I actually think that companies sometimes underestimate the influence they have with the true creators of this. So you can co-innovate and help actually the community, but again, you're a fast mover to be an early adopter. And so I think you get the best of both worlds.
I think the other piece I would add to this is that, it's sort of like two layers. One is, can you do it and should you do it, right? So, it's true, you can fine tune around, a certain set of data to help it understand, what a particular brand voice is. However, if you start talking about anything outside the corpus of what you actually fed it, it may or may not actually be generating the kind of responses that you want. And that's why I think it's really important to figure out what it is that you're actually measuring, right? And one of the things that players, who are specializing in some of these areas is actually figuring out the measurement, right? How do you know it's actually close to your voice, Yes, I can tell ChatGPT to talk like Josh Rogan. I don't, as a brand, maybe I wouldn't suggest that, but you could do that, right? And it can mimic, it's mimicking that based on a lot of data that it has on Josh Rogan. Well, just imagine it can do that if you're putting in your own fine-tuned model, you're kind of doing your own little version of that, but depending upon the breadth or depth of what you're trying to talk about, your data may be insufficient to truly have it deliver that outcome. So the number one question to ask, I think, when you're also buying is, how do you know, vendor, right? How do you know? What are you measuring? How do you know that it actually works to achieve this particular outcome? What data can you tell me other than, well, I used it to create 1,000 documents. Okay, we can use the generic models for that. How do you know that it's actually achieving the outcome? What are your measures? And that can also give you insight on measures you might want to think about in analogous questions where you've made the decision ultimately at some point you want to build it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. The questions you ask of the vendor if you choose to buy, it's measurement, it's governance, it's investments. What investments are they making? How do they continuously invest? What is the co-creation, co-collaboration? It's tons of things, but we can't lose sight of the governance, the privacy, the protection questions that you should ask. And then what does maintenance look like?
Yes.
Not just ongoing investments to make it better, but how do you maintain it? How do I make sure it's going to be available? There's no drift. The quality is, to the point Ryan made, the quality is still there. Like, all of that is important, because even if you buy something, whether it's short-term or long-term, there's still an investment cost that you, decision maker, you, consumer of said solution product, has to also make when you put it into your ecosystem. And it's so important that you understand the implications of that.
You mentioned in your initial response, there were a lot of variables that go into the weighing whether you should build or buy. And I actually think we have a very nice list. You mentioned resource availability, the question of criticality. We talked about the payback period, ROI. The notion of speed to market and time came up as a factor, one of those variables. The question of, is something a strategic asset, or is it going to be a strategic asset? Both the data and potentially what you do with the data. I really liked your point on, can the community contribute more than your particular team? And then there at the end, we talked about how does governance fit in, and the point around maintenance, which I love, because we always forget about there's cost beyond building this thing initially.
In part because the market is moving so quickly, right? So maintenance, of course, innovation is happening all the time in various parts of tech, but like in this area, it's like mind-blowing. Every day something new is coming down, the prices are falling, a new feature, a new, et cetera, a new model, a new way of looking at it. And so that is really significant when we talk about maintenance, because it's like, who is on that and who's on those shifts every day, and how is that a community vis-a-vis us decision?
Right. That's great.
The other thing that I mentioned, I don't think you captured, but I think is so important, is is there anything constraining you? And what I mean by that is, even though we talk about time to market, sometimes time is not the thing constraining you. Maybe some regulatory thing is the thing constraining you. But I think we have to think about, is there anything that is constraining or has a key or profound impact on your decision, limiting it or pushing it one way or the other?
That's great. That's an excellent addition. I think we're just about out of time, so I'm going to wrap it here. But thank you all for the contributions. This is a really fantastic list of considerations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.